Bashir Kouchacji, originally from the Middle Eastern country of Lebanon, appeared to be living the American dream, having opened a successful Moroccan-themed restaurant in Philadelphia, USA, in 1977 with his sister Vivian. Unfortunately, this American dream was to become a nightmare. In 1982, Bashir and his sister decided to open a second restaurant in northwest Washington, D.C. Shortly after installing the phone line, Bashir became the target of an insane and relentless stream of threatening phone calls. The first phone call he received that day, back in 1982, turned out to be the first of thousands he would receive over the course of 9 grueling years. At the beginning, it was just silence on the line. Then, the calls started to include disturbing sounds, and sometimes a sinister laughter. Eventually, the harassment escalated when the unknown caller started telling Bashir, "You will be killed." During these many different phone calls, there were sounds of screaming, machine gun fire, and perhaps most unsettling of all, the perpetrator began imitating the voice of a young boy, and for that reason they started referring to the caller as l'enfant, French for the child. Soon this constant chain of real terror, harassment and threats overflowed beyond just Bashir. Anyone associated with the restaurant owner became a target, and that wasn't limited just to his employees. Even his pregnant girlfriend found herself in the crosshairs. The harassment eventually caused their relationship to end. The Moroccan restaurant would receive up to 20 calls per day from the sinister stranger, and when Bashir travelled to Philadelphia to visit his sister, the calls followed him to her restaurant too. This indicated that the people responsible were probably watching his every move. What really started to make his blood run cold was when the unknown caller began mentioning the names of Bashir's old friends from Lebanon. These were people he had not seen in years. How would they have found out this information? There weren't any platforms like Facebook to give insight into people's personal lives back then. The caller started giving details that made it clear that they were really watching him. This not only added to his fear, but also showed a deeper level of obsessive dedication to ruin Bashir's life. Employees came and went, repelled by the atmosphere the constant harassment created. One employee even checked into a hospital for a month to deal with the stress and nervous tension caused by the endless chain of phone threats. The harassment first got physical when Stars of David were scratched all over Bashir's Mercedes. Then in May 1986, the harassment took an even more serious turn. While driving his car, smoke began to bellow from Bashir's engine. He pulled over and lifted the hood to see what was causing it, and through the smoke he could see flames coming from some wires. He then had the car taken to a mechanic, where he was told that the fault indicated that someone was trying to hurt him. It was clear that his vehicle had indeed been sabotaged. It was at this point where Bashir sought help from the FBI. He asked them to investigate his case and find out who was responsible for this dreadful persecution. After putting a trace on the phone, the FBI recorded more than 3,000 threatening calls over an 18-month period. The calls were coming from different payphones in the Washington metropolitan area at such a frequency that it would have been virtually impossible for only one person to be involved. The FBI concluded that l'enfant was a plot organised by multiple people, possibly for the sole purpose of driving the restaurant owner insane, and l'enfant almost succeeded. Bashir began to crack. He became suspicious of everyone, and his level of paranoia resulted in many sleepless nights. In the nights he did manage to sleep, he would be woken by violent nightmares. The lack of sleep caused him to suffer from extreme mood swings, which made him alienate himself from his loved ones, causing his paranoia to deepen even further. In 1987, he checked into the psychiatric ward of Sibley Memorial Hospital in Washington. He had decided to isolate himself, hoping to have a break from the constant menaces, but even while he was in the hospital, he still received calls threatening to kill him. They even mentioned details about his routine and daily movements, letting him know that they were still watching. And if that's not enough, when Bashir was in hospital, the calls continued at his DC restaurant, where Raj Tooley, an employee filling in for Bashir, became a new target for the harassment. Sadly, Tooley's young son Richard was also targeted. One day, whilst walking home from school, two men approached the young boy, asking if he was Richard. When he confirmed he was, they brutally attacked him. Later that day, the creepy child, l'enfant, called Thule, telling him that they were behind the attack on his son, asking him, "How was that for starters?" And even worse, the following day, they painted "Richard will die" on the front of Thule's home. What was the reason for all this madness? Why was Bashir being targeted? Nobody knew for sure, making it harder to determine who could be responsible. However, there was something in his past that seemed to hold a possible connection. One particular element of the disturbing calls eventually triggered a case of post-traumatic stress disorder in Bashir, and that was the sounds of people screaming as if they were being beaten. You see, back in 1974, Bashir and his American wife Gail were living in Beirut, Lebanon, a region that had seen many years of social unrest and violence. On the night of July the 1st of that same year, Bashir's wife, who was a professional singer, had been performing at a party held by a Saudi princess in the Phoenicia Hotel, a location which was well known to be a meeting place for Middle Eastern diplomats and arms dealers. While en route to pick her up, Bashir was ambushed and kidnapped by armed men. Bashir was now in the hands of the PLO. He spent 5 days being deprived of sleep, interrogated, and being beaten at regular 2-hour intervals for reasons he never understood. When he told the PLO that he was a US citizen, they accused him of being in the CIA, and his experience intensified. On day 5 of his captivity, the lack of sleep began to cause him to hallucinate. He began hearing the screams of what he thought was his family. Amongst the dirt and rubble in his cell, Bashir found a jagged piece of plastic which he used to try to end his own life and escape his torment. He was found shortly after by his kidnappers, who rushed him to a hospital where doctors saved his life. Some reports we read on this story say that it was at this point where he managed to escape, whereas other accounts state that it was with the help of the hospital staff and his family that negotiations were made to secure his release. 2 months after his ordeal, Bashir returned to the United States, where his marriage eventually broke down and ended in divorce. Wherever it was that Bashir had been held in captivity, he knew he wasn't alone. From neighbouring cells, Bashir could hear the desperate screams of other people in the same dire situation he found himself in. When his story was covered by the TV show Unsolved Mysteries in 1993, he said he had started to believe that these same screams were amongst the disturbing sounds being played down the phone to him in many of the menacing calls he received. Bashir never received psychological help immediately after his kidnapping, and he felt paranoid and guilty because he thought other people must have believed he had done something wrong and considered him a political threat. Perhaps some of the same shady people who used to frequent the hotel his wife had performed at were behind the kidnapping, or maybe his loose association with the hotel made him a target in the eyes of other hostile groups. Bashir spent several years in and out of Sibley Memorial Hospital, but thankfully the harassment by l'enfant stopped following the TV appearance on Unsolved Mysteries. As a result, the FBI decided to file this unsolved case for good. No arrests were ever made. Strangely, and perhaps as a result of psychological damage, it was reported in 2002 that Bashir had started 2 anti-Semitic and homophobic websites and posted ads in the Washington Post claiming that Jews and the Israeli government were responsible for his 1974 abduction and subsequent harassment. The article goes on to state that his niece and the restaurants she was now running had distanced themselves from him, adding that they do not condone or share his opinions, making it clear that Bashir no longer had anything to do with the businesses. So what really happened? Did his kidnappers really decide to follow him all the way to the US and harass him for a decade? Another possible theory raised is that one of Bashir's abductors may have been someone that later became a diplomat or politician in Lebanon and may have moved to Washington. Perhaps then they decided to continue his torture through psychological torment, still believing he was guilty of something. Interestingly, the episode of Unsolved Mysteries that discussed Bashir's case left out some details that he had disclosed to the Los Angeles Times newspaper the year before, in 1992. For starters, it turns out that his wife Gail was not at the location she said she would be that fateful night he was kidnapped. After waiting an hour and a half till 1 AM, he left the location without her, and that's when he was attacked and abducted. As well as being a missing detail, this also conflicts slightly with what he told Unsolved Mysteries, stating it was while en route to pick her up. Although it's only a minor difference, it's an interesting one nonetheless. He also revealed in the LA Times article that when he later questioned where Gail had been that evening, her response had been vague. Had she been involved in his kidnapping? And why would Unsolved Mysteries leave these details out? Furthermore, the stars of David being scratched into his Mercedes was also left out of the episode, but was present in the LA Times article. And more bizarre still, the separate account of his car wires being tampered with and catching fire was not reported in the LA Times, but is present in the episode of Unsolved Mysteries. This leads us to question whether these were just editorial decisions, or whether Bashir's story had changed. But why? Was he more than just an innocent victim in all of this? It's hard to find any concrete evidence either way, and there are many more questions than answers in what remains a pretty strange unsolved mystery. What do you think?